Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking the true and honestly almost unbelievable story of how a single little flower brought an entire empire to its knees. I mean, picture this. You've got wealthy merchants in their 17th century garb celebrating their massive fortunes, completely oblivious to the dark financial storm clouds gathering right over Amsterdam's historic canals. This, my friends, is the wild story of Tulip Mania.
So, I want you to imagine a reality where savvy business owners, farmers, and bankers are selling absolutely everything they own. We're talking their land, their life savings, their priceless heirlooms, all to chase a flower. Literally trading a fully furnished mansion for a single flower bulb. This wasn't some fairy tale. This was actually the world's very first financial bubble. But to really grasp how an entire nation lost its collective mind over a petal, we first have to understand the world they were living in.
Part 1. The wealthiest nation on Earth. The 17th century Dutch Golden Age.
To understand the sheer madness of this market crash, we have to rewind to the 1500s and 1600s. At this time, Amsterdam was the undisputed wealthiest city in all of Europe. The Dutch economy was an absolute powerhouse, controlling over half of Europe's entire GDP. And a massive chunk of this wealth was fueled by the Dutch East India Company, established back in 1602. Now, what's incredible about this is that they were the world's first true multinational corporation and literally the very first company on Earth to sell shares to the public. Dutch banks and merchants were the absolute epicenter of global trade. Because the economy was absolutely booming, everyday citizens suddenly found themselves sitting on massive amounts of excess liquid capital. But here's the catch. Modern investing didn't really exist yet. If you had extra money burning a hole in your pocket, your only real investment option was betting on horse or greyhound races. So with overflowing pockets and nowhere to put their cash, the newly wealthy elite started hunting down rare exotic imports just to show off their status. You know, if you had money, you bought Chinese silk or Indonesian spices. If you just owned normal everyday stuff, you were considered lower class. Rarity became the ultimate obsession. Part 2. An exotic new status symbol. The journey from Persia to Amsterdam. Enter the tulip. Originally, this was an exotic plant native to Persia, and it was heavily favored by Ottoman sultans. It definitely wasn't something you'd expect to find in the freezing, windy Netherlands, but in the late 1500s, a botany expert over in the Netherlands received a batch of these tulip bulbs as a totally unique gift from a friend in the Ottoman Empire. He planted them over at Leiden University, and before long, these beautiful, exotic flowers started blooming. This inadvertently sparked a total national obsession. The Dutch elite saw them, they loved them, and they just had to have them in their own private gardens. So, you're probably wondering, why did this specific flower completely take over high society? Well, tulips quickly became the ultimate elite status symbol for three main reasons. First off, they offer these incredibly vibrant, vivid colors that you just didn't see in native Dutch flowers. Second, if you actually touched the petals, they had this premium, almost cloth-like texture, kind of like fine silk. And third, they were highly rare and strictly seasonal. You couldn't just go out and get them whenever you wanted. They only bloomed for a super short window, which made them a heavily restricted, highly coveted luxury.
Part 3. The virus that created millions. The ultimate catalyst for greed.
Now, what really pushed this obsession from just a quirky rich person's hobby into an economy-destroying fever pitch was actually an unlikely biological anomaly. A plant disease known as the tulip-breaking virus started infecting the crops, and ironically, this disease completely transformed the flower's appearance in the most stunning way possible. It literally broke the solid colors, creating these dramatic, multicolored striped patterns. And because human psychology is just endlessly obsessed with what is rare, these infected, totally unpredictable bulbs became exponentially rarer and infinitely more desirable to the wealthy.
Almost overnight, a standard luxury item morphed into a priceless masterpiece. Smart merchants started naming these rare, infected striped varieties after Dutch kings, famous poets, and elite families, just to boost their status even higher. And it worked. This drove the price of a single bulb up to an astonishing 15 to 25 times the annual salary of an average well-paid worker. Think about that for a second. Within just 60 years, the tulip had literally become the 17th century equivalent of a Lamborghini.
Part 4. The illusion of paper wealth. The birth of futures trading.
At this point, the market fundamentally shifted. People were buying tulips purely for their economic potential. But here's the problem. Since tulips only bloom in a specific season, how do you sell a flower that is literally still buried in freezing winter dirt?
The answer to that question changed finance forever. Merchants introduced futures contracts. They created this whole system where buyers traded paper claims for bulbs that hadn't even grown yet. You didn't get a flower, you got a piece of parchment saying you owned a flower that would arrive in 6 months. They effectively invented the modern concept of paper wealth. People were just trading paper back and forth, entirely detached from the physical reality of the actual flower. Looking at the historical records, it's clear this market had completely lost its mind. To put this into perspective, just look at what you could barter for one single tulip bulb. People were literally swapping a bulb in a transaction that included 4 horses, 8 pigs, 12 sheep, 2 entire tons of butter, a silver drinking cup, and a fully furnished Amsterdam house. All of that whole shebang for one single bulb. The entire nation was totally hypnotized by greed. This created what we call a dangerous holding mentality. You know, when an asset's price is skyrocketing every single day, nobody wants to sell. If it's worth 100 today, hey, it might be 150 tomorrow, right? Everyday farmers literally stopped growing actual crops just to farm tulips. Bankers quit their stable, high-paying jobs to trade tulip contracts because they were getting paid in tulips, which were appreciating way faster than actual money. People were mortgaging their homes, selling their jewelry, and going deeply into debt, utterly convinced that these prices were just going to rise forever. Part 5. The 48-hour market crash. The silence at Harlem. But as we all know, economics eventually runs on reality, and the illusion finally shattered. It happened on a freezing cold winter day in December 1637 in the city of Harlem, during what was supposed to be a completely routine tulip auction. The auctioneer stepped up, asked for an opening bid of 100 units for a batch of tulips, and nothing. For the first time in nearly a century, nobody raised their hand. There was just complete, chilling silence in the room. Not a single bid was placed. Now, some historians think the traders simply had too many contracts and were totally full. But whatever the reason was, the market realized in an instant there were no new buyers left. The anatomy of this crash was incredibly swift and brutal. Step 1. The Harlem auction fails to get a bid. Step 2. Because markets run on signals, wild panic instantly spreads like wildfire across the country. Step 3. Everyone suddenly realizes they are holding paper just to sell it, not to actually use the flowers. So naturally, everyone rushes to sell their contracts at the exact same time. Step 4. With literally everyone selling and absolutely no one buying, the prices plummet. In just 48 hours, the value of the tulip crashed to absolute zero. The aftermath of this was utterly devastating. Remember those futures contracts? Buyers immediately defaulted because the tulips were now entirely worthless, which bankrupted the merchants who had promised to pay. People who had mortgaged their houses couldn't pay the banks back, so banks aggressively swooped in and seized the homes and small businesses of the middle class. Eventually, the Dutch government had to step in, passing a law that allowed these paper contracts to be legally voided for mere pennies. In an instant, thousands of people were left with worthless paper scattered in the muddy streets. In just 7 short days, a little garden flower had decimated the wealthiest economy on Earth. Part 6. Lessons from the first bubble. Why history keeps repeating itself. Now, it's pretty easy to look back at the 1630s and laugh at the Dutch. Mortgaging a whole house for a flower sounds insane, right? But honestly, the most chilling part of this explainer is that tulip mania left behind a psychological blueprint that modern society still follows to a T. History just keeps repeating itself. The formula is actually super simple. Excess capital plus speculation equals a bubble. Think back to the recent global pandemic. Governments handed out stimulus checks, flooding the economy with excess liquid capital, while people were stuck sitting at home with no immediate needs. And what happened? Just like those Dutch merchants, people took that extra money and began pouring it into highly speculative, rare assets, inflating their value way beyond all logic and reason. We're seeing this exact same pattern repeating today. Look at our modern markets. Cryptocurrencies shooting up thousands of % out of nowhere. People paying millions of dollars for digital pictures of apes, known as NFTs. The whole wild frenzy over meme stocks. Or even people paying astronomical prices for luxury bags and sneakers simply because they're part of an artificial scarcity drop. We are so often mirroring those 17th century Dutch merchants, buying things that are entirely detached from real, tangible utility, simply because we expect the price to keep going up so we can sell it to the next guy. Which brings us to the ultimate question. We look at those beautiful paintings of the Dutch Golden Age and shake our heads at how thousands of people bankrupted themselves over a simple garden plant. But before you jump headfirst into the next massive viral investment craze driven by FOMO, you really have to ask yourself, Are you buying real, tangible value? Or are you just buying a modern-day tulip? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you on the next one.